Hey everyone, welcome to the Let's Talk It Out platform, specifically the Stomp the Stigma podcast. I'm Alec, aka Trey Busy. I'm the host of this podcast. It's Thursday, March 19th. It's been a while. It feels like since we've done a podcast. Last time I did a live one was about 3 weeks ago, I think. I took a week off. Because I wanted to get my mind, a little bit more straight. Now I wanted to take some time to myself and, have more peace so I could be at peace. And come to find out that time to myself, things progressed to the point where I think we're going to eventually be put into quarantine. So COVID-19 has progressed to the point where it's locking down. There's pandemonium. It's a pandemic now in the world. Good evening, everyone. My mom's in the chat room. EJ4312. Hey, let's talk it out, family. What's going on, everybody? As you come in, I'll greet you guys directly. I don't want to start talking about the topic by myself. I want to introduce my guest tonight. My guest tonight is a published author. She's worked for 32 years as a first responder over in California. Let me see. Things are acting a little glitchy over here. I have a little rust, guys. Sorry, it's a live show. I'll get everything straight now. Okay, boom, here we are. Linda, she served 32 years with the California Department of Forestry and Fire Prevention. She held the ranks of firefighter 1, fire apparatus engineer, fire captain, battalion chief, and assistant chief. Wow. She served 10 years on incident management team and was the adjunct instructor at Cal Fire Academy for Basic Fire Control Academy. So basically, anything that you need to know about firefighting, Linda is the person that you need to go to. Any aspect of the job, of the career, any route you want to go on. So as a retired career first responder, her broad spectrum of service as a writer, author, and certified high performance coach, she has a lot of experience. So I'm just kind of feel like 32 years, I'm 30. So that gives you an idea. Her book, it's just incredible. 32 years. It's always nice to sit down with people and have a conversation with them, and they have so much experience in something. I haven't even been alive that long. But solving the post-traumatic stress brain injury puzzle is the work that Linda, I'm still rambling. I don't want to keep rambling. I want you to talk to the people a little bit. Let them know about yourself, anything I haven't said.
Well, yeah, those are the high points. I was born and raised here in California, in a mid-sized city called Fresno in Central California. And, I started as a seasonal firefighter, actually straight out of high school. 3 days later, I was on my first fire. And I was a seasonal employee for Cal Fire. It's called Cal Fire now. 6 summers before I got hired permanently, and then I started working my way up through the ranks. So I've been married to Curtis for it'll be 32 years next month, and we actually met at a Taco Bell, my last real job before I started working in the fire service. And he had 5 children from his first marriage, so I became an instant mom at that time. All 5 of his kids are all grown up now and married, and they have blessed us with 22 grandchildren. So that keeps us busy, tracking holidays and birthdays and stuff like that. I still like being outside. I really love going hiking. I started a kayak last year. I've just been on this crazy journey since I retired. And the topic of the book, all about post-traumatic stress, basically, is what got me to where I am now, where now I'm showing up on podcasts and talking to people around the country about this topic. So that's a little bit about me. And you're only 30, huh?
Yeah. In the grand scheme of things, I have a long way to go. In the grand scheme of things. But, it's just incredible just to, the amount of time you put into helping others and putting your life on the line every day. I have a great deal of respect for people, firefighters, first responders. Little known fact about me is I didn't pursue the career, but I did get my EMT certification 6 years ago. So I was going to go along that path as well. Certain things changed in my life, but again, I have a great deal of respect for people that work in that field. I mean, they've saved people, obviously saved people I know lives, and it's a very selfless thing to do because you're putting aside, you know, whatever you have going on in your life, whatever stress you have, whatever anxiety you have, just to go and be that person, that signal of hope. Like, you know, when say someone's injured or something, or, you know, it's this again, it's an emergency, and then here come the lights, right? Like, I mean, here come the lights come in, and I'm here to do whatever I can to resolve the situation, you know, to be a calming force. Sometimes one of the hardest things that I can't remember, you know, even I did like some service hours, and you know, in the hospital and stuff like that, just telling someone, you know, trying to make someone feel like they're going to be okay, everything's fine, when you know for sure in the back of your mind this person's not going to make it.
Yeah, that's always those are tough calls. I don't care how many times you've been on them. You know, you have this expectation of yourself based on your training and experience that when you show up at the scene of a call that you're going to be able to affect a positive outcome on that. And in reality, though, that's not always the case. Sometimes whatever happened, the final outcome was already determined before you even got the call. And it takes a certain mindset to be able to wrestle with that sometimes, because it is a disconnect where you think you should be able to save somebody, and then you can't. And that definitely plays into what's going on now with COVID-19 at all the hospitals that are like totally swamped already here and in Europe. And I imagine, you know, the hospital employees in China were probably feeling the same thing. It's like, this is what I trained for, to do X, Y, and Z, but dealing with this pandemic, it's like it's way outside the scope. And I can only imagine how frustrating it is for those people to be running out of resources, they're running out of equipment, there's not enough ventilators to go around, and knowing that depending on who you're putting onto that ventilator, what the odds are of them coming off of it and being able to go on about their life, that has got to be such a hard thing to deal with right now.
It's a perspective that not a lot of people understand, or I wrote out a pretty lengthy post the other day, I think it was Friday, about us taking things for granted and how we shouldn't do that and how we should be appreciative for what's in our life. Because, man, like, just again, as people out there, we were talking about it off the air, down there celebrating and in Miami, it's like, oh, it's a pandemic, or, you know, or COVID-19, oh, we need to, you know, be quarantined. But yet people, hundreds and hundreds of people were out there on the beach, and now they're saying the numbers down there in Florida have spiked up with people that are diagnosed with it. You know, people don't.
Oh yeah,
it's a game. It's a joke to a lot of people. You know, like, they don't understand because they've never been in the shoes. Like, again, you spent 32 years in the shoes of someone that has an understanding of how things progress like this. Now, granted, I don't ever remember a pandemic, you know, in my life. I've been trying to do research on something similar, but, you know, it's something. The biggest thing is the unknown, right? Like, they're saying that you can have it but not have symptoms for a while. You know, that's that unknown. Even then, could give you some, you know, you could be anxious a little bit about it. I mean, I'm gonna be completely honest. My mother, who was in the chat room last week, her boss came into work and was sick, and she wasn't feeling well about it. She wasn't feeling well, and my mom started not feeling well. She stayed home from work, right? So, I mean, again, all this is going on, the anxiousness that's on your mind from that. She ended up having, you know, she went and got tested, and they found out that she was negative. But even still, just like just that thought in your mind. I mean, come on now. I was in tears on Friday because I was like scared as hell, right? You know, like I know how things could progress because I have a understanding of where this thing can go, what the coronavirus is capable of for people. Because again, sometimes you know your underlying health issues, sometimes you don't know what they are.
Yeah.
That's why
And you pointed out one of those things too, because you've been trained as an EMT, you have a little bit more knowledge than the average person on the street of how the body works and how infection works. And sometimes having that type of knowledge and that level of knowledge can be a bad thing because now you think about it more, especially under these circumstances. It's like my husband, he's had some health challenges off and on over the years, and I get a little spun up sometimes because, I almost know too much. I've been in the job for too long. And, but then I remember how strong he is, and he's come back from everything. But I'll be honest, I'm really worried about this. It's not in our county yet that we know of, but, if he gets it, I don't know that he'll pull this one off, as severe as the symptoms can be with this. So I am also worried, very much so. I kind of got used to having this guy around me for 30 plus years, and I'd like to have him around for a few more. But it's like right now, all we can do is we're doing what we're doing. He's grounded; he's not allowed to leave the property, and I'm fortunate in my office. I have an office staff of one, so my social distancing is pretty well taken care of. But still, every time I see somebody on the street, it's where we're at now locally. We're under a shelter-in-place order, basically. We can go out and buy groceries, and that's about it. But to do our normal life and know that it hasn't even hit our county yet, and it may be another month before we get back, or a month or two before we get back to any semblance of normalcy. That's kind of mind-boggling.
I was reading articles that were saying the worst case scenario could be 18 months until we get back to normal. Worst case scenario. I mean, it got real to me. Like right before they canceled the NBA, right before they suspended sports, articles I was reading about how it was affecting Italy, and then how I seen it was new cases popping up inside the U.S. And I'm reading these articles a couple weeks ago, and I posted some on Facebook. I was like, hey, if you guys are thinking about buying tickets to something, these big events, just don't do it. People are asking me why, what's going on. Obviously, they don't pay attention to news or read articles or anything. But 3 days later, we found out why I said that. I mean, when they canceled the NBA, they canceled it, right? I mean, I've never every sport. The March Madness was canceled. I've never. It's been a week. This has been the longest week ever. Anybody knows me know how I am with sports. It's been a week, and it feels like it's been 2 months. I just not having. That's how you know it got real when they're ready to put aside all that money, all that gambling money, all that. They're like, okay, you know what? We got to stop. Because at first they were going to do events without no crowd. At first they were going to do events without crowd. They're like, you know what? We're going to play the games. We're going to play March Madness, but we're not going to have any crowd there. So at certain games, there were people there warming up, and all of a sudden they get whispered in their ear, and then they leave the court, go put their clothes on, leave the stadium because, oh, by the way, now we're canceling the March Madness tournament. So you know it's real. XFL, middle of the season, boom, ended.
Done.
It's ridiculous that it's gotten to this point because a certain somebody who was in charge of everything 3 weeks ago thought it was a hoax. So, thought it was a hoax 3 weeks ago, and now he's calling it the Chinese flu. But we're not going to talk about that. We want to talk about solving the post-traumatic stress brain injury puzzle. We're going to talk about your book.
Okay.
And I just want to know, first of all, you said I was blindsided. That's probably the best way to describe how I felt, as the perfect storm of forces was brewing. Never before experienced by any of us. It's descended its wrath that day and changed everything. So what happened? I want you to tell me in the audience a little bit about September 12th, 2015.
Okay. September 12th, 2015. I'm in California. I live in Lake County, which is roughly 100 miles north of San Francisco. for reference, early afternoon on September 12th, a small grass fire started in the Cobb community, and I wasn't on duty at that time, but I happened to be listening to the scanner at home, and I heard the on-duty battalion chief order additional resources, and he started calling for some real small-scale evacuations of neighboring properties around where this fire was at. And they started calling for additional chief officers, which got my attention. So I called into our dispatch and asked, because I knew at that time another division chief actually lived right down the road, but he was out of the area. So I offered to respond as the second chief officer, and I threw on my uniform real quick, told my husband I'd probably be back later that night, and took off towards this fire. I had about a 20-minute drive to get there, 25 minutes. And when I first crested the hill where I could look into the valley where this fire is at, a very small white smoke, wasn't doing a lot, didn't look like I had a lot of energy on it. It was just in an inconvenient location and threatening a few homes. When I finally met up with the battalion chief to have a face-to-face meeting so we could transition, I was going to take command, and I was going to let Bert handle the operations side of the incident. That's when he advised me that there had been a Mayday situation that had just been called, and my radio wasn't set on the right TAC frequency, so I had not heard it. And that's when things started to change drastically. So I took command of the fire. He took off to go find those guys that were in a tight spot, and I kept driving on this road, and I still hadn't seen any part of the fire or any drift smoke or anything. I got around the next bend in the road, and that's when it really hit me just what we were dealing with. We had spot fires on both sides of the road. There was obviously a wind driving this thing. And so that was how I got started with the fire that day, was basically I walked into a tornado for all intents and purposes, and it went downhill from there. They were able to find the firefighters that had been put into a bad situation. My chief wanted to know what was going on, and I went to check on the firefighters before I made that call, and that's when I discovered that the firefighters had received burn injuries. 3 of the firefighters had like second-degree burns. The 4th firefighter had third-degree burns, and he was somebody I've known and worked with for 20 years. And when I saw the extent of his burn injuries, that was at that moment, looking back, that's when the seed of my post-traumatic stress injury happened. And then, I still had a fire to run, and we were doing massive evacuations, and that's how the day went for the next 18 hours. The fire ended up having a 70 mile per hour wind pushing it, so it ended up destroying part of Cobb. It burned into Middletown, which was like 6 miles away. By nightfall, by midnight that night, the fire was 40,000 acres, and I had evacuated basically half of the county to get them out of the way, and we were starting to do evacuations into Napa County. And when the sun came up the next morning, just driving to go meet other people that were going to take over the day shift, looking around homes that had been destroyed, and including homes where I knew my co-workers lived. It was just this real disheartening and a real heavy weight I felt that morning. And I got thinking, like, there is no way we got everybody out of the way in time. That there's going to be lots and lots of fatalities on this. And right about then, I was driving along this highway, and it's like there's burnt out cars everywhere. That just added to the reality of what I was thinking at the time. Um, and I actually started having symptoms. I mean, I was symptomatic that day. I mean, I started what I know now about post-traumatic stress. I started dissociating within an hour until I finally got myself back under control, where I could focus on what I needed to do on the job. Um, and that was a weird thing how that I was physically feeling these sensations like a door was slamming shut in my head 4 or 5 different times over that first hour I was on scene. And but then the insomnia started up. That was almost automatic and immediate. That went on for weeks before I finally asked for help. Um, I was having nightmares. I think in the first 6 weeks after September 12th, I ended up with nightmares. I was drinking more, night terrors, insomnia was horrible. I had one good night's sleep in those 6 weeks. I finally had a week off. We drove out to the coast, and I slept like a rock that night. And then the insomnia just kicked right back in the next night. And that's when I knew I needed to go see my doctor to get something for the sleep. Of course, she wanted to put me on anti-anxiety meds right away, and I said no to that because everybody goes through an occasional bout of insomnia, and I'm human like everybody else, and I knew that if I could just get a few good nights sleep, that I would be able to reset basically and get back on track with dealing with the long-term effects of this fire, which are still affecting the communities that were burned that night. They're still rebuilding, and it's been almost 5 years now. But yeah, so those were the early things that were going on. What ended up happening on the fires, like 2,000 homes and buildings were destroyed. Fortunately, there were only 5 fatalities that night. The 4 firefighters that got burned were the only firefighters that got burned. But it was a total system overload, very much like what's going on with the COVID-19. Lake County is very rural, and it takes a while for additional resources to drive into the county. Even coming from the Bay Area, it's a 2+ hour drive. So even though I ordered like 40 or 50 fire engines and then some within an hour of being on scene, some of that equipment was still rolling in at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's like we just got slammed, and we most certainly didn't have enough equipment. So yeah, it just it's very surreal. You bet. When I was walking went to see where the firefighters were and to check on their condition, it's like I felt like I was in a movie, like one of those Vietnam War movies, and it's like everything's kind of going slow motion, and it's like, am I really seeing this in real life? And it's like when it's people it hits you differently than if they've been total strangers. So yeah, it was just like one thing after another, and then I had set up my command post. And I was trying to get a hold of the battalion chief so we could follow up on some things and get coordinated a little bit better. And I couldn't reach him for like 30 minutes on the radio. And at first I was thinking, well, he's just busy. Oh, he's still busy. And well, now I'm starting to get a little irritated because he's not answering his radio. And meanwhile, there's a whole bunch of explosions going on up the hill. And that's the direction he had gone. And then I started thinking, well, has something happened to him? And who do I have available to go basically on a search party? And that's where I was thinking. It's like I already got 4 burn firefighters. Now I'm going to add one, if not more, depending on where he's at, who he's with. And finally, he came up on the air and answered me on the radio and said, "Phew, okay." But it was like those type of things just kept happening. It was one after the other, and there was no time for a break. And so yeah, that's the background of how it all started.
First of all, you said something during your story about the book that, like you said, it's metaphorically exactly what COVID-19 has going on. It's literally exactly, it started off as this small brush fire, but it just grew and it's growing and it's growing. I mean, 2,000 structures destroyed. I mean, Jesus Christ, that's 76,000 acres destroyed. That's, I mean, come on. I think I remember vaguely hearing about this during this time. So 5 years ago, September 12th, I was 25 years old. I remember hearing about this. Zach says the mental fortitude it will require to maintain in such a high pressure situation is commendable, but there is no doubt it will take its toll. I have the utmost respect for anyone that puts their life on the line. For others, it's the aftermath, however, that gets forgotten by a lot of us. Absolutely. That's what we were saying earlier. Like, people don't understand that you put that night or that during the day when that started. You said it was 18 hours of fighting that fire.
Yeah.
18.
For me, yeah.
18 hours.
It was 18.
So for those 18 hours, Linda, you put aside everything that you had going on in your life, the bills, whatever disagreements you had with family, laundry, whatever, everything in your life got put aside for 18 hours, and you had to put on like this uniform and just become, this symbol of hope to go save lives, to go save the environment. I mean, 18 hours straight.
Yeah, 18 hours, and there were times I actually felt guilty because as the incident commander, I established a command post, and I was relatively safe where I was at. And there were times I would think about the men and the women on those fire engines and the police officers and the sheriff's deputies are out doing evacuations, trying to get people out of the way. And I knew that they were basically getting their asses handed to them all night long. And I felt guilty for standing where I was at. I really did. And then there were times, somebody would call, hey, if you have like another 5 engines, we could really use them up here. And I had to tell them on the radio and basically give everybody an update because at that time, I didn't think the people were working where the fire had started knew exactly where the fire had moved to already. So it's doing this big update. It's like, it'd be nice to send you 5 additional engines if I had 5 additional engines, but it's like I've run out of fire engines, I've run out of water tenders, and by the way, the fire is now 6 miles away from where you started, and it's still growing and it still has wind on it. It was a challenge to say all that in such a way that would help them understand the totality of what was going on without even wrecking their level of hope in what was going on. Some of those engine crews were out there nonstop for 4 days before we finally got enough replacement engines to get them off the line and let them go get some good sleep. And they were exhausted by then, but it was, little did we know at that time that the Valley Fire was just a sign of things to come. In 2017, the area got hit by multiple fires because of the winds and knocking down power lines. So the Bay Area got hit again with a lot of fires that caused even more damage, caused more deaths. The following year, 2018, two more major fires. The one up in Redding killed a firefighter in a fire tornado. And then the Camp Fire, which burned through Paradise and absolutely decimated that town, and that fire killed, I think last I heard was 86 people. So, I can put the Valley Fire in perspective because now there are bigger and more worse things that have happened. But, for the people that were involved with that fire that day, it was very traumatic. And I know it's like I'm not the only one that was on the fire that day that ended up with post-traumatic stress. I know at least 8 other people, and probably more. Most of them are still working. I just happened to get injured like 16 months before the end of my career because I was going to take my service retirement anyhow. But I spent the last 16 months of my career basically with worsening symptoms because I didn't get diagnosed until the middle of 2016. And then from July 5, 2016, which is the day I was finally diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, I spent the rest of that year, the last 6 months of my career, were the worst 6 months of my career because I was dealing with all the symptoms of post-traumatic stress, not just the insomnia and an occasional nightmare. I had the full boat, and to the point I was paranoid, even the people I've been working with for 20 years. And, I had a startle response. Walking down the hallway of headquarters, somebody would come out of the side office and I would jump like 6 inches. And they would laugh at me and I would laugh it off. But, it was those were the type of things that were happening.
That I mean, it's just again, we put a lot into perspective. So, you were diagnosed with PTSD, and again, the title of your book is "Solving the Post-Traumatic Stress Brain Injury Puzzle." So, when you say it's a puzzle, does that mean that you put things together, like you took pieces and you put them together where they're supposed to be at? Like, tell me a little bit about how you went about treating this diagnosis.
Well, I had this thought one day, and I'd already been in treatment for a little bit, but I got this thought that basically I was trying to put myself back together. Because when I was at my bottom, it's like my head hurt. I would have these horrible tension headaches. My stomach hurt. I didn't want to talk to anybody. Everything I knew had basically been blown apart. Once I retired, I didn't even have the structure of the job. And it finally dawned on me, it's like, I have to start building my own structure. I have to start doing things. I have 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I have to live with me. And it's great I'm in therapy, but that's an hour a week. What am I doing with the other 167 hours? And that's when I started thinking about my recovery as a puzzle. I needed to start putting things back together, making sure that pieces were in the right place. And when I started thinking it along that way, then I could start segmenting out different things in my life that I needed to work on. And sometimes I would work more on the therapy stuff I needed to do. Sometimes I would work more. I had really started drinking a lot during this time in my life. And so I finally started going to AA. And sometimes I would focus more on my recovery from the alcohol. And then I would go back to focusing for another month or two on the therapy side of it. Then I would focus on, my physical body has taken a pounding. Let me work on my diet a little bit to get my stomach calmed down. Let me change my diet. I mean, I tried the keto diet to deal with the headaches. It's just all these different things. And when you're in the middle of post-traumatic stress, it's really easy to get overwhelmed. And So I could only focus really on one thing at a time. I couldn't focus on like three or four different things like I used to be able to. So I had to just really break it down. It's like, the next 3 or 4 days I'm going to focus on this. And then I would be mentally exhausted. And when I finally got myself back together, okay, now I'm going to go focus on this. And it was just this a little bit here and a little bit there. And another piece of it was also learning more about post-traumatic stress so I could become my own best advocate. Because although we had talked about stress and occupational stress, we'd had training on what adverse stress, symptoms look like, and in case you're feeling them, maybe you need to go talk. We'd had those type of trainings. That was actually what got me to the point where I knew I needed to go talk to somebody about my insomnia, because I remembered those trainings from work. And I knew that my stress reaction was abnormal for me. Because most of the time, even if I had a bad call, it might stay with me for a day or two. But once I got off shift and had some days off, then I'd be good. But this one I couldn't shake off. So I had to learn more about post-traumatic stress so I could start making sense out of it for me. And then it actually helped me have better conversations with my therapist. It's like, here's what's going on. Because then I actually understood what symptoms were and how they were impacting me. And the more I knew, and the more I got to a point where I could trust my therapist, then I could actually share some of the more painful things I needed to get off my chest and talk about them.
Absolutely. My mother says, first she said, first responder's life is relentless and sacrificial. Lives are always in the front lines. She says, co-occurring conditions all at once, good for her for understanding her recovery and pacing it out to meet multiple needs. This is a wonderful and impactful message. And I was going to say that. I mean, I was, once, breaking it down bit by bit. I mean, obviously you can't attack everything at once, healing wise. So you focus on you focus on bits and pieces at a time, and just pace yourself, and I was having a conversation with Robert Duff. He was a former guest on the show, but he's telling me how I should not penalize myself for just feeling like I can't do so many things at once or focus on so many things at once. We have a hard time not a hard time, but we have a habit of doing that, just beating ourselves up for not being able to focus on multiple things at once. And it's like, well, no, you can't. You can't beat yourself up for something you can't do. You could try, and if you find out you can't do it, then break it down to something that you can handle. So then ever since I had that conversation with him, it's just
Yeah, the ability to multitask is a fallacy, because you can't. You can focus on one thing, set that down, and then go do something else. But even to the point where if you're totally focused on whatever it is you're working on, and somebody sticks their head in the office and asks you a quick question that breaks your concentration, you answer that question, and then you turn back to what you're doing. Depending on how well you have trained yourself to get into a focused state of flow when you're doing work, it could take you up to 15 minutes to get back to where you had just been. So you don't really have the ability to multitask. And it's like, once I learned that, because I thought I was multitasking when I was being really effective in my job before I got injured, but I'm actually more effective now because I have learned how to basically drop into a state of flow so I can actually focus on what it is I need to do. Writing the book was a challenge. And, I actually had to wait probably a year longer than what I had wanted to work on the book, because I wasn't ready yet. I didn't have the energy. I didn't have the the endurance to sit down and write day after day after day. So I had to do a lot of healing to get to the point where I could have that type of focus and have that type of energy to stay on task, basically, for the bulk of the book got written in 3 months. But until I got to the point where I could do that, I had 1,000 different ideas bouncing around my head, but I just had no way of grabbing them and channeling them into something that might help somebody.
Wow, it sounds like we need to go ahead and add that book to the list of books in the online book club that we run.
There you go.
Read that, because again, I mean, even the title in itself is powerful. Linda, I want to thank you for agreeing to sit down and have this conversation with me. My mom says she's a hero for tending to others, but tending to her self-care as quality of life needs.
I like your mom.
Yeah, she's a very, very likable woman. And I'm not just saying that because she's my mom. But again, like, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit down and have this conversation, this interview with me. I'm sure a lot of people that are listening back, this was a live interview. If you're listening back, I mean, I appreciate everybody who will be, that missed the live one. But again, thank you. If there's any last words of wisdom you want to leave the people with before you get out of here.
Considering what's going on in the world and in the country with COVID-19, if you get a chance to thank the people working in the medical world, the paramedics and the EMS and all the other first responders that are being exposed to COVID-19 because of the job, thank them. Because they need support too. And other than that, wash your hands and maintain your 6 feet. Thank you.
Right. Main thing, wash your hands. Don't touch your face. Keep the 6 feet. And don't go, well, they're closing down bars and restaurants. But come on, guys, just take it seriously. Take it a lot seriously. I don't want to see people joking about having barbecues on Sunday because it's warm, with hazmat suits on. Like, just stop, guys, please. Yeah. Take it seriously. That's all I got for you guys. I thank everybody who subscribed to the podcast network. Addictions didn't happen this week for obvious reasons. If you listened to the episode earlier, my mom wasn't feeling well. I'm sure she'll be more than happy to give you guys an episode of Addictions in the near future. But yeah, I mean, meditation on Sundays. You guys know the routine for the platform. But again, thank you guys for listening, and I look forward to talking to you guys again in the future.